Your Highnesses, Excellencies, distinguished guests, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is my distinct honor to welcome all of you to Riyadh for the World Economic Forum special meeting on global collaboration, growth, and energy for development. Today, as we convene at this historic gathering, we stand at a crossroads of opportunity and responsibility. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has long embarked on its own journey of creating opportunity and growing global responsibility. Under the guidance of His Majesty King Salman, His Royal Highness Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman launched Vision 2030 to propel our bold transformation. The result is an open, dynamic, global platform which has set the stage for crucial dialogues like this one to tackle our greatest social, economic, and human challenges. Today, as I look across this room, I see people committed and determined to chart a course towards a stable, secure, and sustainable future. We gather at a time when the world is on the cusp of transformative change. Our economies, communities, and industries are faced with unprecedented challenges, but also immense opportunities. This special meeting could not be more timely or relevant, with three key themes that are integral for long-term progress: inclusive growth, energy for development, and global collaboration, each of which requires our undivided attention. Inclusive growth is not just a lofty ideal, it is a categorical imperative. We must co-create a global economy that works for everyone, where every nation has the chance to thrive regardless of its wealth or status. This means investing in people, in their skills, in their education, and in their well-being. We must also harness and direct new technologies to benefit humanity. Artificial intelligence has the potential to contribute trillions of dollars to the global economy over the next decade. Its adoption will disrupt the way we live and work, but it will also pave the way for new industries to emerge. Its benefits must be accessible to all, and its risks carefully managed. AI must uplift humanity and not exacerbate its inequalities. Energy is the lifeblood of our economies, but it must be produced, supplied, and consumed responsibly. We cannot allow a world where some have access when others do not. We must invest in clean and renewable solutions, and we must do everything we can to balance the energy trilemma of security, equity, and sustainability. No one should be left in the dark. But let's be clear, none of these problems or challenges exist in a vacuum. They do not know borders. So let me ask you this, frankly. Do we really think we can overcome these challenges individually? Does it really make sense that we as a global community only come together on some of these challenges, but not others? When we look at the success and progress we achieve when we find common ground and work together, we arrive at a simple truth, that global collaboration is not optional, it is essential. This critical juncture for human development calls for a convergence of cultures and ideas. We are all in the same boat, and we can either collaborate to steer it towards peace and prosperity, or we will drift towards a future that is out of our control. As we set the stage for the discussions over the next 2 days, let's not take this opportunity for granted. This meeting is a unique gathering of diverse perspectives and expertise. So I urge you to engage deeply and go against conventional wisdom. And I challenge you to have difficult conversations and be uncomfortable. For it is through candid dialogue that we can truly innovate and find lasting solutions. We must hold ourselves responsible, and we must ask ourselves, what can we do over the next 2 days? Can we course correct? Or will we let this opportunity to shape a brighter future drift away? We can seize this moment to unlock our collective potential and fulfill our shared responsibilities. Together, we can revitalize international collaboration and fire up new engines of growth that will empower generations to come. You see, there are moments in history that must be captured when the stakes are high. This is one of those moments. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this moment, to this place, to this land of dreamers, innovators, risk takers, and doers. Welcome to the Global Growth Platform. Welcome to Riyadh.
Open question just to start. I know you put together the budget for Saudi Arabia back in December, and you had your assessment of how you thought the growth outlook was going to pan out this year. We're a couple of months in. The IMF are saying that growth has been relatively resilient despite the shocks, but of course beneath the surface we're seeing some divergence. How do you see things versus where we were a few months ago?
First of all, thank you very much for being here, and hopefully this will not be the last visit. So
definitely not.
And thank you, Kristalina, for being here also, and Mr. Abdulaziz. Few things. I think globally, as we have heard from Kristalina, there are significant divergences. There are countries who are doing very well, and there are countries who are really struggling, and there are countries in between. And therefore, if we are talking globally, we need to take that into consideration, that there are differences in positions between different countries and different regions. Second, I think the world for the last 4 years have seen multiple shocks. And those like us who had planned for the longer term will need to be agile enough to make sure that they adjust course, dealing with these multiple shocks. So you need to make sure that you are not rigid. And I've always said in economic planning, there is no egos. So it's okay to change, it's okay to adjust, it's okay to reflect on what new circumstances that calls for changes. And that, to me, is an advice that I would give everyone around the world, is that you need to make sure that, yes, you need the long-term plans, you need the vision, like Vision 2030. It is actually very helpful, not only for you as a government, but for the whole economy, and for the wider even region and international investor community to see that actually you have a plan and you are doubling down on implementation. But also you need to make sure that you adjust. So with inflation, with COVID and the serious supply chain disruption, and then
co-CEO Investcorp, Bahrain, and Richards, Vice Chair, Fidelity International, Claire Woodman, Head of EMEA, CEO of Morgan Stanley & Co. International, and Marcus Wallenberg, Chairman of SEB Bank in Sweden. Thank you all for joining us. Claire, let me start with you. I have mentioned some of the risks that can affect the banking sector this year, but obviously there are other risks to consider. So what worries you the most in terms of affecting your business in 2024 and beyond?
So thank you. Really important question to start with, and actually timely for us at Morgan Stanley, because one that's addressed in a piece of research we published this morning. Andrew Sheets and Anne and I were discussing that earlier this morning. And you're right to call out those topics: geopolitics, central bank policy, fiscal outlook, inflation. And certainly, you know, any newspaper article you read, discussions in fora like this, these are certainly being perceived and seen as the key drivers of what lies ahead. And certainly, it's correct to say that a lot of asset markets are certainly following expectations on oil prices, the future path of and expectations on interest rates. However, there are interesting data points around individual asset classes and how they may and are responding in terms of looking at the credit spreads. But I would say that banks always have to have sustainable business models. They have to be able to adapt to change, to know what to adapt to in terms of foreseeable risks and unforeseeable risks. And I think post-crisis, and I'm sure we will get into this discussion, with more capital, with more liquidity, highly experienced management teams deploying tools like stress testing, scenario planning, horizon scanning, I do think that banks and bank management teams are well equipped to deal with what lies ahead and what may be defining factors. But one thing is absolutely certain, the industry will change. It's evolved considerably, and we were talking about that a few minutes ago, over the past 15 years, which in many ways has set the scene for what we are dealing with and will be dealing with for the years to come.
We'll go back to some of the points that you mentioned, but I want to hear from Hazem what worries him the most, because you are operating in a region close to the geopolitical conflict.
Yeah. So, Laura, I should say that I feel better today than I did in 2008. I think many of you would remember the 2008 period where we didn't know if our money was safe in the bank, any bank. It doesn't matter. So the reality is, look at all the shocks we have gone through in the last 4 years. COVID, we didn't know if our loved ones are going to be alive or not. Interest rates, we didn't know if we're going to be able to afford our mortgage payments or not. And then you have some very blue chip names like Silicon Valley Bank and others are under. But I think it's fair to say that most likely none of us, similar to how many of us have done in 2008, rushed to the bank to withdraw some cash, leave it home in case you can't access your bank account. So whatever system was put in place, whether it's the regulators or self-regulated by the banks themselves, it's worked. And I think it's fair to say that there is a significantly higher level of trust in the banking system today than it was 15 years ago. And as we all know, trust is the #1 most important asset any bank has before the balance sheet. So to answer, before answering your question...
After the banking crisis of 2023 and the bank runs.
Correct. But trust is still much, much better today than it was any time 15 years ago. So I think in that respect, I'm not worried about the integrity of the banking system. Now, I am excited by what generative AI and other efficiency tools can bring to the banking sector. I still scratch my head, why does it take 48 hours for a wire transfer to go through? What happens to that money? If someone literally picks it up and goes to the other bank and deposits it in my account, why do I need 48 hours, okay, for the banking? So I think there's a lot of efficiencies in the system that come through. The GCC itself have been quite shrewd in opening the doors, both from a regulatory, from creative thinking, from the arrival of innovative financial and banking tools to evolve. And if I have a crystal ball in 15 years' time, I would suspect that perhaps the center of influence globally in the banking world will include not only places like New York, London, Hong Kong, or Singapore, but most likely this part of the world as well.
Well, and do you share these thoughts that the banking crisis of 2023 is over, or is the risk, or are the risks still there?
So I think if there are any regulators in the room, they would have been, excuse me, absolutely delighted to hear a supportive comment from the financial sector. But I think it's very fair. I think 2023 was quite a test of the supervisory system, and it was a test that happened because of supervisory failure. If you look at Silicon Valley Bank in particular, they didn't have a credit default scenario, which is often what triggers a credit crunch. A default plus leverage is the usual combination, combined with a liquidity mismatch. It was pure and simple. It was a mark-to-market issue. What took people by surprise on the back of that supervisory oversight, let's call it that, or lack of oversight, was the speed with which deposits then moved because of digital banking. So there were a couple of big surprises to what had been anticipated, and yet the system coped. So I think that's really quite an important marker that's laid down there. I think the bit that we don't know about is that a direct consequence of the changes, the regulatory, the supervisory changes that were put in place post-2008 is how much of the risk capital effectively moved out of the banking sector into the non-bank financial institutions, much of which is much less supervised or not supervised at all. And some of the statistics on that are quite staggering. This is in the US, but the bank share of mortgages has gone down from more than 75%.
What are the emerging opportunities and what are the challenges that you are still seeing in the UAE?
First of all, I'd like to thank the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and my brother, His Excellency, on the great hospitality, on what we've done in the last day and the next day as well, hosting the special meeting. Like said in the beginning, you know, we're not taking a lot of our jackets off, and see the airport security checks at the doors as well. So this is something which is nicer here. So I think we should push for something like that happening always here in Saudi Arabia, and the warmth and hospitality that we're feeling while we're with our brothers and sisters. I think from that perspective, you know, Simon, I think you did a great job moving to the region by coming a bit into the hot season. But let me give you a couple of things as well. Which
it does get hot, I've been reliably informed.
It is, but it is in Europe as well. So around the world as well, it's getting hot and hot. And I think what we've seen is, as well, we've seen the highest occupancy rate never happened before in 2023 in the summer, where I had a meeting with the hospitality group just a week ago, and I said, how was 2023 summer for you guys? They said, we're unprecedented. Why? I said, well, normally in summer, in the hot season, we kind of go to 50 to 60% of hotel capacity. And we ask our workers to go on, you know, for unpaid leaves or for, you know, half-paid leaves and so forth. So that's how the hospitality industry balances itself. So we were shocked on the amount of people coming in. The occupancy rate was about 73 to 74%. Never happened in the history of tourism industry in the UAE. I'll probably speak about the UAE on this aspect, but this is really shows something different. I met them last week and I asked them, all right, what's going to happen in 2024? Are you guys ready for the 2024 summer season? And they said yes, and I think there's going to be a lot of people coming in for the summer season, given that the heat in Europe is going to be similar to London and Milan or in Abu Dhabi or Dubai or Riyadh. So I think there will be a lot of opportunities to look at more of things to do on the water, on the beaches, and this is something we can offer. And you can wear a sunglass every day. So this is something which we take on further. But now let's go on. I want to pick up on something that you mentioned on Your Excellency and Simon on the aspect of education and jobs. Now, the most important of our tourism industry is it gives a lot of jobs. But the problem is how do we get our young youth generation, since they are in schools, into the tourism sector? So when we look at it from after graduation from university. So we go into university and finding, but we need to look at curriculum in the K-12 schooling, where we put some initiatives on that aspects where we get them into the tourism. Because we have a problem in culture here that families today in the region wouldn't allow their boys or girls go into the tourism industry. And this is a fact challenge that we see in the UAE. I don't know if it's I think it happens as well in the Kingdom and in other as well countries in the region. But we feel that the tourism sector is not built for our culture. And we don't allow the youth generation to enter, and we need to change that. It gives a lot of prosperity, it gives a lot of culture-driven aspects, and I think it's important for us as well to really push the youth into it. So we need to start looking at education, not from university level, but even going back into the schools and look at curriculums where we can start educating the youngsters. So it's more about understanding now the challenges from education. Now the other part is we've seen through Expedia data as well, we have a lot of sustainability travelers. And the challenge where we saw as well is how do we educate these sustainable travelers into the world and how do we bring them in? The hospitality group last week as well, when we spoke to them, we said, why don't we take they call the Blue Beach flag? The Blue Beach criteria. How do we become more sustainable on our beaches? We have beautiful beaches in the region. How do we take this onwards? And I want to stop here because I want to mention something His Excellency have led us through, which was a GCC visa for tourism. It was his idea, if you allow me to say so, everyone here, because in closed meetings we do have these kind of,
We are live streaming,
right.
But other than that,
that's good.
No one's watching, no problem.
Well, but I need to mention this because it was his idea, and I think it was one of the ideas that we took it on the GCC, and we brought the tourism the industry together. It went on then to the Ministry of Interior meetings, and then to the top meeting which happened back in December, where the rulers of the GCC nations came together and announced it globally. And I think one is important now, looking forward, is how can we come together? We're working on something called the Grand Tours. How do we attract people to come in and actually travel through the GCC for 30 days, for instance? How do we create grand tours for longer time? For instance, spend 7 days in the UAE, 7 days in the Kingdom, and so forth, 4 or 5 days around, and then spend about 30 days. We're looking at people who are just retired, who wants to spend and explore, or who have a long holiday break and want to take it on, or maybe have a 1 year sabbatical and they want to come off and really see the region. And that's something we can offer. How do we do that? How do we create a tour that will take you around for 30 days or maybe 60 days as well? And there's a lot to see, especially when we have the coolest winter in the world as well. And I think this is something we want to keep on doing.
Your Excellency, thank you. I think when I heard about that, it did strike me that it's just evidence that there's more that unites people in this region than divides people. And that's, I think, an important message. And I think the tourism industry has the capability to really...
Arabia, it's about global collaboration. It's about reviving growth, but it's also about energy for development. And there's no development without energy. And this is at the core of this panel. It's a great panel. I'll come back to that. But we are faced in many ways with the triangle. And one is energy access. There is close to 800 million people on our planet that don't have access to basic electricity. Let's not forget that. And then in Europe, we have learned a lot about energy security also the last year. So you will have to have predictability when it comes to energy. And the third part of the triangle is decoupling. How can we reach all this and continue development, but also reaching the international agreements that we have made in Paris and lately now at COP28 in Dubai. How to square a circle or maybe square a triangle, I don't know. At least I'll leave this to the panel. That is great. His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz has been such a great supporter of our summit. Thank you, Your Highness. He's also asked as the host to speak last, so just so you know, I'm not bypassing His Highness, but it's on his request. But we will come back to you, Your Highness. And we have from the left here for you, we have Darren Woods, Chairman and CEO of ExxonMobil. Welcome. We have then Vicky Holub, President and CEO of Occidental. And then we have His Excellency Saad bin Sharida Al-Kabi, Minister of State for Energy Affairs of Qatar. And then we have Kadri Simpson, Commissioner for Energy, European Commission. So this will be a very interesting and important discussion. Let me start with you, Darren Woods. How is it possible to make sure that we are able to secure security for energy, that we are able to reach those that don't have energy, making sure that energy is also underpinning the necessary economic growth that we need, but also then meeting the international obligations and decouple this from growth in greenhouse emissions? Is there a path for this, and is Exxon on that path?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I would say I think the good news is this is not the first time the world has faced challenges or issues that are multidimensional that you have to take into account and address a number of competing interests. I think it is unique in that we are attempting to do it at a scale that in the past has never been attempted, and we're attempting to do it in an area that is so critically important to people's lifestyles, their prosperity, and the importance of it to economic growth. So that makes it particularly challenging. But I would say, we have approached this in the past. Society has. Different countries have approached this as a one-dimensional problem that has frankly been translated from reducing emissions to reducing oil and gas. And I think we've gotten very fixated on a very narrow solution set and put in policies around the world to try to address that very narrow solution set. And we're beginning to see the consequences of that. And so my view is we need to step back and focus, one, on the problem statement, which is emissions, and then start thinking at a very global level, how do you address reductions in emissions? And the good news is we have done things like this in the past across the globe. And the first thing we need to address is a mechanism and method for accounting for emissions. We today, the world, no country has a mechanism in place to actually account for carbon emissions. So if you can't measure it, you sure can't manage it. So start with understanding and have a globally accepted carbon accounting system in place. And once you have a carbon accounting system in place, you can begin to put policy in place to address the carbon emissions associated with any product that society makes through carbon intensity specifications. The beauty of that is you don't have to have the answer. You're not focusing on a way of getting to an answer, but instead you're focused on the outcome that you're after. And you let the markets, academia, technology, businesses, governments focus on how best to achieve the outcome. That unleashes the power of capital markets and focuses on an objective and doesn't require policymakers to try to come up with an answer on their own, but instead focus on delivering a solution. And this, fortunately, is how we've managed many other parameters that we've tried to control with different products. So think of lead in gasoline, think of sulfur emissions and diesel. There's a number of examples around the world and around a lot of different products that we've already managed to make improvements through a more rational, objective process.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to move to Kadri Simpson, Commissioner for Energy of the EU. EU has been through quite a transformation. 40% of the natural gas that was consumed came from Russia. From one day to another, most of that gas was gone. You pivoted into LNG, both from Qatar, the US, but you also started a process of rolling out then renewables. Listening then to Mr. Woods, but also your experience now, where do you see the energy future of the European Union and still staying competitive?
Thank you for your question, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for your kind invitation. It's a pleasure to attend today's special meeting. And indeed, it was just a couple of months ago when the European Union was able to announce that we are exiting from the crisis mode. So for a couple of years, our citizens and our industry, they had to face very high energy prices, and on top of that, there was, especially during the winter season, a concern, do we have enough natural gas at our disposal to heat our homes. And now, 2 years since Russia started to manipulate our gas market, we can say that our underground gas storages are sufficiently full and prices are down to pre-war level. So I do remember that in 2021, when we saw first signs that Russia was manipulating our markets, I was visiting Qatar, and we did very intensive outreach to find alternative suppliers. It was a challenging task, but luckily we had already an impressive network of LNG terminals built out across Europe. So indeed, we managed to diversify our supplies, and saying that, it was a surprise for many member states that one dominant supplier can cut you out like this, because pipeline gas interconnections, they were built during Soviet era. They connected more than a dozen member states in Europe with Russian gas fields. And this situation that we were left without Russian natural gas was not the result of our sanctions. On the contrary, it was their unilateral decision to create difficulties, political difficulties for our governments. But then, of course, like we already found out in 2021, it was impossible to replace 155 billion cubic meters overnight with LNG. No LNG producer was able to increase their production in such a short notice. So we had also to implement emergency measures, and we requested our governments to cut gas consumption. They did so. They cut their gas consumption across the board by 18%. How was it possible? So 1/3 of our gas consumption is due to the fact that we heat our homes. So that we had to continue. We were not able to announce that people will freeze. Another 30% goes to power generation, and there we made a difference. We brought online very fast renewables. Past 2 years have been record years for renewables. Only last year we brought online 73 gigawatts of new wind and solar installations that helped us to cut gas significantly. And that brought prices down. And this is a clear signal that our investors, when they had the opportunity to make investment decisions, prioritize renewables. Of course, we have to invest also our taxpayers' money to build up the grid infrastructure. We plan to do so. Just last year, we presented our grid's action plan. And this covers not only our mainland infrastructure, but we will also connect offshore wind farms. We plan to bring online 111 gigawatts of new offshore wind power generation. And as you know, the biggest offshore windmills are as tall as Eiffel Tower, 280 meters, if you also take into account the subsea foundations. They produce, well, they are 15 megawatts, so they produce as much as 20,000 households need. So we call our sea basins, North Sea and Baltic Sea, our future green power plants. And this is a promising development. This is something that we can also advise other governments to follow. And clearly, I trust private investors. I do see that this is the sector where they direct their investments.
What do you say to those in the European saying that LNG and natural gas is not environmentally friendly? Do you say that this is a necessary bridge, or how do you address that?
Indeed, for us, natural gas right now plays a very important role for many member states. Natural gas power plants are the ones who help us to cover peak demand when there is not sufficient wind or solar. Of course, we are also privileged to have a vast potential of hydro reservoirs at our disposal, but the most difficult year, summer 2022, we saw that there was a drought in Iberian Peninsula, and this created on top of Russian manipulation, a very difficult situation. Now, on gas, we just presented our 2040 targets. European Union will cut CO2 emissions by 90%, and that means that only renewables, well, this clearly will not be sufficient. So we also brought online carbon capture and storage strategy, and also new innovative solutions like SMRs. Some of our member states are very excited to bring online new nuclear, and this is totally accepted. Member states can choose their energy mix, and as you know, the commitment of ours is to become climate neutral. So all the low carbon technologies that help us to do so are welcomed.
What do you say to the European countries that have said that they're not continuing with nuclear in this situation, on top of the situation with the Russian gas?
Well, this is mainly triggered by the public acceptance issue, and you will remember that globally there was lots of discussion after Fukushima accident. So my biggest concern is that right now Russian troops are occupying the biggest European nuclear power plant. This is Zaporozhye power plant in Ukraine, and if they will recklessly create some kind of disaster, then public opinion changes for sure.
Thank you very much. Let me then move to you, Minister of Energy of Qatar, His Excellency Al-Kaabi. Two questions. One is the global energy demand. If we now see global growth back at 3.2%, there will also be an increased demand for energy. Where do you see that energy coming from? And where do you see the role of LNG in this and the long-term prospects for Qatar? I think you're considering even increasing the production of the northern field with like 80% or something is on the table. So maybe you can enlighten us about those plans.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz for inviting me to attend here, and thank you and the forum, and thank everybody that's attending for attending this distinguished gathering really here. Regarding the outlook for the demand in gas, I think was your question in general, but I think energy in total. Of course, this green push that we are talking about, we're all for having a good environment for us and for our kids and next generation. So we're all responsible citizens living in this world, if you will, small world, and we all want to do what's right. The importance is to do it in a way that's responsible for this generation and next generation, and make sure that people that want to grow and countries that want to grow their economy have the same rights that the richer countries have all along, and we take everybody along for the ride. You've mentioned 800 million people not having basic electricity. I think the number is more like 1 billion or whatever. And if we think about another 1.5 billion to 2 billion joining us in the next 30 years or so, you need power for additional 2 billion people coming on Earth. So I think if we shouldn't be selfish and just talking about what we want in our house and forget the neighborhood, if you will. The way it has been pushed that, demonizing oil and gas all along for the past almost decade now, and really putting the oil and gas sector as if we are not doing good for humanity, and everybody that's green is trying to push that narrative and so on. I think now everybody's turning to understand that there is a need for oil and gas for the long term, and the people that were saying we need green hydrogen, blue ammonia, green ammonia, whatever, nobody's is coming up and saying we can pay the price for that. A lot of governments are talking about green initiatives, but they actually are not paying for it. And ultimately you have consumers that will be paying for all these green initiatives, and they will not be able to afford it, even in richer countries. The demand, I think, for oil is going to be there for a very long time. You need petrochemicals that wind farms and solar energy cannot produce, so you need petrochemical plants, you need all the refined chemicals and so on that you will need for a very long time. Gas is going to be needed to power all the electricity that's needed for the expansions, urea and ammonia that's used for fertilizers, and as mentioned by my colleague here, for the intermittency of solar and wind. So oil and gas are going to be needed for a very long time. You can debate, when you speak oil, when you speak gas, but that's irrelevant in my view. The important thing is we all do it in a responsible way. And if you look at everybody that's here in the panel, whether it's my colleagues from the American companies, His Royal Highness Aramco here in Saudi Arabia, whether it's in Qatar and around the world, everybody is doing their best in emissions, in methane abatement, in spending billions in carbon capture and sequestration. So everybody's doing it in a very responsible way to make sure that we can develop and have growth for humanity in a way that is very responsible. And I think we're not being given enough credit for doing all that. And as mentioned by Darren, there isn't a real mechanism to have a proper accounting that we all have a benchmark and everybody is really judged on the same basis, if you will. You have different institutions, EIA and whoever just puts out numbers, and most of it is politically driven.
Is the elephant in this room the coal?
No, coal I think, you see, replacing coal with gas in power cuts your CO2 into half. But also, I think we should be reducing coal in a big way. But also, as we are defending the gas and the oil that's needed for a very long time, you also need to do it in a responsible way for the countries that cannot afford to do it that quickly. So countries need time also to wane off coal. And I think if they do it in a responsible way and then slowly, get off coal, I think that's also very important, because that's an immediate solution where you cut off coal, you reduce your CO2 emissions. But I think the demand is going to be there for a very, very long time, and way, way beyond a lot of the projections that people are talking about. Most of the discussion is driven by political drives for elections.
But
that's the bottom line in my view.
If the demand for coal continues, how will we then be able to meet the commitments from COP28 in Dubai?
Sorry, again?
How can we meet the commitments from COP28 in Dubai if coal continues to grow?
I think you have seen that coal has been on a record pace. So I think you can't meet it if coal continues in the same pattern.
So Darren has asked for a short...
Just a clarification.
Yeah.
The Dubai COP28 talk about unabated coal, the phasing out of unabated coal. So abated coal is virtuous.
Thank you for that very important clarification, Your Highness. I'll go then a short response from Darren, and I'll go to Vicky Hollub. So, Darren.
Well, I just wanted to comment on the elephant in the room, which I think it's not coal per se, it's cost. And I think one of the challenges associated with, again, how society's been advancing this is we've taken very small sample sizes and extrapolated to very large problem sets. And the reason why coal continues to be a dominant energy source today around the world is because of the cost advantages associated with that, and the fact that developing nations and people who are trying to raise themselves and their prosperity levels require cheap energy, and coal is a source of that. So the elephant in the room is, how do we address the cost? And we're not going to do it by focusing on, in isolation, one or two solutions. Instead, it's trying to engage the broader capital markets, broader technology set, to find ways to start reducing cost so that you can reduce emissions, as His Excellency said, responsibly, And part of responsible emission reduction is doing it affordably so that nations can do that. I would just make one point with respect to Europe and the response to the high prices. There was luck involved in this, in that there were two very warm winters which allowed the demand for gas to be low, and that allowed inventories to build, which was fortunate for the people of Europe. A price that's been paid but hasn't been fully recognized yet is deindustrialization of Europe, and the fact that many companies are going out of business, and it's very difficult to compete on the world markets with a lot of the policies that are being, prescriptive policies that are being put in place in Europe. And the cost of that will begin to manifest itself over time. And so huge implications to addressing this huge challenge, but we've got to start doing some real math, looking at the cost, extrapolating and understanding the total problem set rather than very micro. And I think to His Excellency's point, we got to stop the propaganda and the politics and get down, rolling our sleeves up, and the world needs to develop a realistic plan for making progress in this space.
If it's okay, Vicky, can the Commissioner just comment shortly on that? She's asked for the floor before, but you will have ample time together with His Highness. Commissioner, just a short response to that, if you want.
Thank you, Borg, and be aware that each time when you mention Europe, I have to reply. But first I wanted to mention that on coal, this night I will take overnight flight back to Italy because we will have G7 energy ministers meeting, and one issue that we will discuss there again is how to avoid new investments into coal production, because we are very much aware that in Europe the coal-fired power plants are already nearing their end of life cycle. So we ask some power plants that are as old as 40, 50, 60 years old to retire. This is a normal thing to do. But in Asia, the average age of a coal power plant is 13, so you ask teenagers to retire. And this is a different challenge. Of course, we have to help these nations to replace most polluting alternatives with cleaner ones. And this is the reason why the European Union championed a global pledge to triple renewables by 2030, because according to our understanding, renewables are already the most cost-efficient way to produce electricity. What is happening in Europe, since we announced our Green Deal, we do see that our Green Deal is also our growth strategy. So indeed, first mover advantage is something that our businesses are grasping. And this is also covered with our Net Zero Industry Act. So we do have 12 promising new clean tech solutions where we will invest some of our research and innovation funds, but also we will support European producers. So the very moment when there is a concern that we cannot compete with American companies due to the fact that we don't produce gas, natural gas ourselves, but Americans to cover their domestic demand, we have to be innovative and opt for homegrown alternatives. This is what we are doing.
Thank you. And before coming to you, Vicky, I tried with one theory on elephants in the room, coal. Darren said cost. Could I also launch a third candidate, and that is subsidies? Well, we do know that coal is heavily subsidized in many countries. There's more taxpayers money going to subsidizing coal than it's for energy transition. But well, let's keep those elephants there, and you feel free to comment on them or even launch new elephants. Vicky, over to you.
Okay, so I'm not going to launch any elephants, I hope, but I'll address the ones that are already in the room. And that is, I agree with Darren that there has to be a mechanism in place that drives the incentive for the whole world to respond to the situation that we're in. And we're certainly in a dire situation because of the fact that some are distracting the world from the real problem. And the real problem is that we have to decarbonize oil, because it doesn't really matter how you look at it. Wind and solar are fine for generating electricity, but wind and solar are not going to be the answer for aviation and maritime and trucking and people, especially those people in Texas who want to drive their trucks everywhere. Every family has multiple vehicles, and EVs are not the first two. EVs are usually a third choice, and they're the fun choice. They're not the choice that really provides the means to get around. That may change over time, but that's not changing very quickly in the U.S. So the situation we're in, to me, is while we're working policy and while we're working the incentives, we have to work the technology. We can't push that out. And so I think that our industry has faced big challenges before. We've always been able to step up and address those challenges. We've done it with the development of 3D seismic, with enhanced oil recovery. We've done it with within the United States when our production dropped down to less than 6 million barrels a day. The shale revolution took over. It took 10 years to make that work. And so now it's going to take us some time to make direct air capture work and to make some of the carbon capture on point sources work. But the way we view it at Oxy is that even if you stopped all the emissions from every industrial site around the world, you still need to reduce CO2 out of the atmosphere. And the strategy that we're pushing and hoping the industry will adopt, and I know some are adopting it now and starting to execute a plan to do it, and that is to take CO2 out of the atmosphere, use it in enhanced oil recovery in the reservoirs that we have today. It's a way to generate net zero oil, which then generates net zero fuels for maritime and aviation and gasoline. Also, that would be a lower emission source of oil too, because the infrastructure would already be installed. So there are multiple ways that generating net zero oil could be a solution for our industry and could be adopted as we advance the technology. And just as wind and solar took about a decade to drop their cost dramatically, I think the challenge for us is dropping the cost of direct air capture. I believe with the aid of digital twins and computing power that we have today, when wind and solar did not have that same tool available to them, I think that we can drop the cost. We're building a facility that will extract 500,000 tons of CO2 out of the atmosphere in the Permian in the United States. And we're already, before we even start the third and fourth train, we're already seeing an improvement in technology. We're seeing that AI is also a help to make that happen. So I believe direct air capture has to work. There's also a revolutionary technology to generate electrical power, and it's called in the United States net power. It's something that combusts hydrocarbon gases with oxygen instead of air, so there are no volatile organic emissions, and it captures the CO2 in fresh water as a part of the chemical reaction. So instead of a user of water, it's a provider of water. And the CO2 drives the turbine to create the electricity and then captures off the side a stream of CO2 that can then be used in enhanced oil recovery. So looking at a circular system here where you could actually have the ability to continue to produce oil and gas, the lowest cost, highest intensity fuel in the world, and do it in a way that helps you to get more oil out of the reservoirs we're producing today, that in the end creates the economics that will work to make that a viable solution so that we don't have to discontinue oil. It becomes an emission-free part of the energy mix.
Thank you. Do you want to comment now, Your Highness?
No, I thought you were going to ask me something.
Yeah, I will ask you a question. So
I like this.
Me too. I thought it was very interesting. I was tempted to ask Darren and the minister if they share this vision of the decarbonized oil and CO2 out of the atmosphere. And dropping costs like we've seen on solar in these areas. Is this decarbonized oil, Your Highness, is that a vision you share with Vicky?
If you can move the questions to Darren and Saad, and then I will.
Okay, so Darren,
I'm enjoying somebody's doing the homework on my behalf. So
Darren, you heard Vicky decarbonizing oil. She's putting a lot of money into carbon capture and storage to try to see if we could see the same development there as we saw for solar, fell to 1/10 of the price, and also capturing CO2 from the atmosphere. Are you sharing this vision, and are you optimistic that we can see these kind of breakthroughs? And I'll have that question to Darren, and then to His Excellency, and then we'll see what His Royal Highness thinks.
So I think technology is needed. Advancements in technology and breakthroughs in technology are going to play a very important role here. I would say that to date, there hasn't been enough work done in that space or enough incentives for people to make the kind of advances that the world needs, but it is starting, and I know Vicky's working in that space. ExxonMobil has a brand new technology that we're working on trying to drive the cost of direct air capture down. There are many other companies doing that, and so I think the good news is there is work going on in this space, in the technology space. The bad news is the costs remain today, I think, prohibitively high. You can apply it in very small applications, oftentimes at high prices, and the challenge is how do you develop a technology that you can broadly distribute to deal with the issue across the world. And so I do think it's going to be important. It comes back to the point I was making before. We shouldn't be focused on the molecules of hydrogen and carbon and that go into crude oil. We should instead be focused on the emissions. Oil is going to be around for a long time. People have to remember that the issue that we're trying to deal with is the combustion of oil products. So combustion and the emissions associated with it. Deal with the emissions, you can still combust. Even without combustion of oil products, today oil goes into, and if you look at the demand for growth for oil going forward, it goes into chemical products that are absolutely essential to modern life. That's not going to go away. And so the idea that you're going to eliminate oil and gas, I think, from the equation in total, I just think isn't based on the reality of the molecules of those feedstocks and what they go into to support the standards of living that everyone around the world is either enjoying or aspiring to. And so you've got to find a technology to address the emissions. So I'm very aligned with Vicky in terms of that opportunity set. I think the challenge is at what stage does society make the breakthroughs and how far can we get the cost down? But you won't make progress if you don't get started. And I think that's the message that Vicky has. That's the message that I have.
Selman, sir.
Yeah, I'll maybe tackle the second part of the CO2, which is the capturing from actual production. I think the direct capture was one. I think Darren covered it very well. On the on the capture of CO2 from our production, if you look at what we've done in Qatar, we've been injecting 2.5 million tons of CO2 that we're capturing from our facilities in LNG since 2015. 2.5 million tons per annum. So before anybody was talking about CO2 sequestration or capture, we were already doing it. In our production increase that we're going to have, we're actually in construction today to go from 77 million tons to 126 million tons. We've announced also going on another phase to 142, but just in the first phase of development to 126, we're going to capture another 11 million tons per annum of CO2 and sequester that. All our LNG fleet, we've already ordered are in construction of 104 LNG ships. All of them are going to be powered by LNG without any heavy fuel oils to power them. The whole CO2, the whole LNG scheme that we have is the lowest LNG scheme from basically production to ship in the world. Even with the enhancement that we have, we're going to add another 3 to 4 million tons of CO2 sequestration. We're building the largest blue ammonia plant in the world that has solar and CO2 sequestration attached to it in the south of the country. The other third part, which I think also Vicky talked about, is enhanced oil recovery. We're capturing CO2 from our industrial sites in the north of Qatar, which is the LNG plus the chemicals, and we're piping them. The pipeline construction has already been completed to take it across country to our Dukhan oil field for enhanced oil recovery. So that's all being done, and I'm sure if you have, Amin Nasser is here, he sits here and tells you about the stories they're doing in Aramco, they're doing what we're doing and even more at a larger scale. So everybody's doing their part of being responsible producers.
I think
but
also
people don't look at that much.
No, so I think that I think that the decarbonization, of course, probably is most cost-effective with coal, then with oil, and then natural gas. But the whole revolution that we could foresee here, Your Highness, related then to decarbonized oil as one track. It would be interesting to hear your comments there. But this is a broader panel, as I started.
Yeah, but I thought the original question has to do with how can we energize the world economy now and in the future.
Yeah. So much broader, as I started.
So if I may just be I have no understanding of how elephant culture is, so I'm going to be the camel in the room. Camels I understand and I can co-opt with that, but I'll be the camel in the room. And the camel in the room will tell you, again, we should not be in all of these events declaring our Puritans from being the nasty people that does something wrong to the environment and not being monolithic in our choices. We stand the risk of being accused of acting irresponsibly or in an irresponsible way. I think the bigger question that people need to devote a lot of time, and they will realize that there are so many elephants to attend to. Darren, you mentioned costs. Saad, you mentioned technology. Others will tell you a bigger evolving camel now, elephant, is trade barriers, where people are now, they're giving it a softer name, which is fragmentation. I call it silos. So if you have silos, if you have, again, people forget that climate change issue and sustainability is a global issue. It cannot be attended to in regional scopes or a smaller territorial thing. It has to be global. To make it global, I think we have to be conscious of the fact that we here in this room and many others here in the room have choices that at least 60–70% of the world population do not have that choice. Those who are suffering from energy poverty, those who cannot make ends meet, those who are still burning trees, converting them to charcoal and making ends meet through selling that charcoal and buying food for themselves. We see them ourselves in Saudi Arabia because we have our sustainability program and we work with so many countries in Africa and Southeast Asia, and we have people in the ground that see the misery that people are going through. In fact, I talked to Darren and Vicky sometimes on issues of how can we help and support. So I guess the best thing we do is that we should realize that, and again, we go like economists, we go from macro to micro. We have to assess what would be the world energy demand in the future, take into account trying as much faithfully and honestly to bring people up the economic ladder, and there are 6 billion people that needs to go higher, and look at what will happen to the world economy as a lollipop and what happened to energy consumption will be if these 6 billion go up into the economic ladder higher. Let's not forget, as Saad was saying, that there is 2 billion more people to come to planet Earth, and they need to be fed, and they need to have jobs, education, and civil ability to live and coexist with others. And again, that will add more energy needs. But also it will propel the economy, because otherwise we will be condescending on the quality of the people and the humans that exist today and will exist in the future. More important also, we should be cognizant of the fact that technologies are evolving and there will be lots of centers that seek, we talk about AI, we talk about all of these huge requirements for energy. And I ask you, how are we going to deliver the hundreds and hundreds of gigas that will be required for these technologies? We also need to be cognizant of the fact that oil and gas is moving. We move and we will move, we'll continue to move on oil to chemicals. And by the way, it's not an anathema, because even in the process of electrification, people would need plastics, people would need polymers, people would need things to move the cars. The car is a car, be it ICE or electrified or whatever form of engine that operates it. 50% of that car will come from plastics. And as people income improves, as people in Africa and Southeast Asia and all of the other parts of the world, their well-being enhanced, they will be buying cars, be it electrical or be it ICE or whatever it is. Who is gonna produce the components? So it is in components, it is on the amount of electricity and amount of energy that is required. People tend to avoid looking at the bigger picture and focus more on the narrow narrative. Either am I going to appear to the public domain as being clean or cleansed or cleansing, or am I going to be accused of being part of the problem? I think a serious, more attentive approach would be congregating people and say, we all need every type of energy, and every type of energy will be used in the future. Our main concern is how to make that amount of energy going to be consistent with mitigating to attend to the issue that we should not forfeit and ignore, which is, again, faithfully attending to the issue of climate change. If we can all congregate around that and fixate ourselves about what to do collectively, regionally, it would not work. Country by country, it would not work. Eliminating choice while others can, I was happy to see Kadri saying we have allowed the member state to have their own energy mix. Am I right? Well, yeah. So let people have their own energy mix. Let people make the choice. This morning we had a session. Brazil can deliver so many things on methanol, biomethanol. Others have different choices. Let people do the choices. Again, let us make the principle has to do with emission and not to forfeit the idea of reducing emissions. If we can congregate around that, and by the way, this is what we have agreed in Dubai. Because I believe that what we have agreed in Article 28 in Dubai is a recipe, is a menu, as I call it, French menu, which is an a la carte. Talks about, yes, and that's the distinction I mentioned just as I tried to interfere. In that article, it talks about unabated unabated coal. Nobody would like to see an unabated coal being utilized. But then there are other elements. There are 8 other elements, including renewable, including carbon capture and sequestration, including transitioning away from hydrocarbon. But look at the distinction. In that item, we use the word phasing out unabated coal. When it comes to hydrocarbon, we said transitioning from. And there are 8 choices. So pick and choose. What's your choice? As long as you can showcase that you are mitigating and you're reducing your emissions, I think we're doing the whole world will be doing a great job for not only for this generation, but for the generations to come. If we don't do that and we don't act as international citizens, responsible citizens, I think we'll end up with so many other. We just enumerated 4 elephants. There will become 6, 7, 8, and you know what will happen? All of the whole thing will not be attended to. So even if Europe succeed wholeheartedly to achieve all of its goals, emissions will come to Europe from different directions. And nothing will survive the day if we don't, again, work holistically. I'm sorry for taking much of the time.
Thank you, Your Highness. I wish we could have continued with this panel for another 15, 20 minutes, but there is a new panel on the geopolitics coming up with His Highness Prince Faisal. I think what we learned from this panel that there are elephants in the room, but is also that we will need to be able to do several things at the same time. We will need to address the increased energy demand with 2 billion more people. We will need to also address the situation for those that are living in energy poverty today, close to 800 million. I think there are different numbers out there. My team wrote 772 here. I don't know where that number comes from, but there is a big chunk of people that don't even have electricity. Then we need to also be inspired from what we have seen from the renewables. Who would have thought 10 years ago that the price of solar would fall to 1/10 and wind from 1/7? And that is the new technologies that also Vicky alluded to: decarbonization of oil, also carbon capture and storage, CO2 capture in general. And then, of course, it is the security piece. You know, if you don't have diversification of your energy and rely on one partner, that's not what we're doing on other areas of our economy. And then it's reviving economic growth that we also will need to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, no energy, no development. And then is this overall commitment to decouple this from growth in CO2 emissions. So it is really, really, I think, the most challenging puzzle that we are faced with globally for the time being. And of course, there are ways of then measuring better. There are ways of putting a price on also what you want more of and what you want less of. And then His Highness's point about unabated coal, that's critical. And if you want more unabated coal, I guess you should not subsidize what is not unabated coal. So these are some reflections from myself at the end. I hope I didn't then start a new discussion by this, but I feel very privileged to have such a great panel here about and also dealing with one of the most complex issues of our time. So big thank you to the panel. Thank you very much. And it's a good sign, you know, not all panels you want to continue, but I think for this one, we would have liked to continue a little bit longer, but c'est la vie. Thank you. Shukran.
But you see, we are very civilized with our friends from the EU, contrary to the media.
Thank you.